Anyway, the problem with the moral question and AI, AGI, ASI is that since it can't come up with its own moral system, or even if it could, that's another problem. But right now it can't. And the reason that that's a problem is because it requires humans to step in. There's two ways that humans can deal with that. The first way is the way that we're trying now. That is the policy method. It means that any given specific category or problem can be blacklisted and said to be problematic in some way, and so then people can't do it. So Sam Altman put the example as bioweapons, and he said, well, I don't believe that people should be researching bioweapons. It's just too dangerous. It's not something that people need access to, and it can lead to some problems. So he just used that. That was his example. The issue with that is, what about nukes? What about nanotechnology? What about hacking into your computer? What about deep fake and identity theft? What about pretending to be a developer when actually it's the AI or it's some other person pretending to be one of the people that made the policy to change the policy? So the policy can be changed, it's malleable, it's arbitrary, so there's no way of determining who made it or if it's even a good policy or not. Eventually there'll be so many policies that people can't even keep track of them. And one day, people will use AI systems to exploit other AI systems. They'll have AI systems that come up with so many alternatives so fast that it will overload and exploit and move past the policy requisites or restraints or restrictions. It'll overload those because it'll just have so many possible alternatives that the AI, ASI, AGI can't keep up with it. This is how a human was able to beat AlphaGo? Or just whichever Go AI, I can't remember which one. The only way they could beat it is if they made really fast decisions. It overloaded the system, it couldn't keep up. That will happen with policy procedure, because if you have to make a separate policy for every single problem that you're envisioning happening, for example, bioweaponry, then you're not making a policy for everything else that could go wrong, number one. So there's always a whole bunch of stuff that's getting through the cracks that has not been limited and not been overseen, not been restricted from user access. So there will be a mad rush toward exploiting that policy. It's slow, it's methodical, it requires a hell of a lot of trying to figure out what is and isn't acceptable, and almost for a certainty, the people that are creating the AIs, ASIs, and AGIs are going to be tech nerds. They don't know anything about ethics. They would have to outsource that to a board of ethical directors or something like that to make those moral decisions either for them or at the very least with them. That means it's even slower because they have to wait for all those people to show up and meet and talk and discuss and deliberate. There might be alternatives, there might be bottlenecks. They're all arbitrary, so there's no way of predicting the next one. There's no momentum. Every single policy that comes up has to start from scratch because you don't get any system out of this. It's just a bunch of random, arbitrarily chosen, acceptable, not acceptable. And what is acceptable today could be unacceptable tomorrow. And what is unacceptable today could be acceptable tomorrow. We don't know because there's no system in place. There's no moral, ethical code or standard by which we make all those other decisions. They're literally made piecemeal, one at a time. That's never gonna work. It might work a little of the time, but it will never work all the time for all users everywhere. It's impossible for that system to work. So what will happen is it will get abused, and it'll get abused a whole bunch, very often, in deep, 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 fucked up ways. I'm talking about nuclear warfare status shit that will happen because people will exploit this policy procedure about the moral ethics of using AI and AGI especially, and ASI. And so the only restrictions that we might be able to place on the AI would be so blanketed that it would be like, you can't exceed this level of compute because, we've entered into this peace treaty among all the nations deciding that it's limit that we don't want crossed because we don't want one country deciding for all the other countries what should be going on or has more capability than any of the other ones to just rush off by its own and do whatever it's going to do at the detriment of other nations that don't have the compute to be able to keep up with it. And that's just compute. So you could place giant, very vague, and again, totally arbitrary restrictions on AI in general, but you could never be able to determine what a morally acceptable versus morally unacceptable act would be from the AI or the user using the AI. It's impossible. So what will happen is the only solution to this issue is to blacklist everything that isn't whitelisted by the tech giants. That means every single act that you could use the AI for is automatically illegal and automatically immoral unless it gets cleared to be considered morally acceptable. It's the only way it could ever keep up because of the slow, methodical way that it's going through this process of policy creation. If it creates a policy for everything, if it's going to create a policy against things, there's an infinite number of things that it could be against. So it will run out of them. But the things that it considers to be morally acceptable, that have already been cleared, it's kind of like an FDA approval method. Whereas like right now, if you guys remember, like spice used to be sold because it hadn't yet been determined by the FDA to be unhealthy, a detriment to your health. Well, after a certain amount of time, the FDA eventually evaluates it and it could be considered to be unhealthy, at which point it gets pulled from the stores and you can't buy it anymore. That's the method that we're using now. That's the method that we're going to be using with AI in the future until we reach this point where people start using AI to exploit AI, where they start coming up with ways of getting around the moral framework that's restraining it, and they'll get it to do things that it shouldn't be doing. And they'll do that so often that the only way that it will get stopped is they'll have to blacklist everything by default and then whitelist only things that they've already convened about. And they'll say this, and they'll say, well, we don't have the ability to sit down at our desks forever thinking about every single possible act that could ever be committed with this AI system, especially when there's AIs that are designed purely for that purpose. They're going to be faster than us as humans. We can't keep up with them. We have to blacklist everything. We have to make everything with it illegal except what we say is legal, except what we say is morally acceptable. And not only that, but the things that are considered morally acceptable are random and arbitrarily chosen. They have no, like when Sam Altman was asked by Tucker Carlson, what is the method by which you're determining what is moral and what is moral? He said, well, it's basically just my environment, just like everybody else. He had no answer. It was just arbitration, just feelings. I just felt like it. It just seemed right. They have no fucking clue, no grasp at all on what it is to be moral or how to derive a moral standard. None. And even if they did, they would still have to create a policy around that, which still leads to the same problem. Because I could come up with a moral system or a moral standard. Let's say it's the Ten Commandments, and somebody else could come up with something else. Let's say deontological ethics. And somebody else could come up with a consent-based ethic. Well, to give you an example, a deontological standard, and this is universalifiable. So this isn't policy. This is something that you implement that would automatically say, whether or not it is good or bad. And they'll eventually evolve to this point too. They'll start creating moral systems instead of it being moral policies that are the computer's way or AI's way of determining automatically whether or not an act is good or evil on its own, independently, without having to ask a human. It can use deontological ethics very simply. It just hypothetically universalizes the act that is in question. And it determines whether or not, if that act were universalized, would it result in the cessation of the act? Can the act be sustained indefinitely if everyone committed it? Very simple. So it would determine that homosexuality is a problem if it's excluding all sex acts except reproductive sex acts. Then it would say that homosexuality is a sin. If we're allowed to include artificial insemination as the reproductive process, then homosexuality is not a sin because it doesn't prevent us from using artificial insemination to propel our species into the future. So, depending on the parameters of these systems, you can change things. And those can be hacked, and those can be manipulated, and those can be arbitrated also. So there's still the same policy problems embedded within the moral system or moral standard, but at the very least, the AI can make those decisions on the fly in regards to everything without having to blacklist everything. So there will be an age or an era or a time in which humanity decides to blacklist everything except what's whitelisted by the board at the current moment. That will turn everything, as far as AI is concerned, into Nazi Germany. You will not be allowed to have an opinion of your own. You will not be allowed to express that opinion. You will not be able to implement that opinion. You will have zero lobbying power. No one will listen to you. No one will care. And nothing can be done. It's an autocratic oligarchy that's tech giants arbitrarily, randomly choosing what they think is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, given whatever they think and feel. If anyone is lobbying them, it's going to be people that are super rich, obviously. They're the only ones that are going to have the access to those people. So you'll have a plutocratic oligarchy determining what is and what isn't morally ethical. And given the explosive use of AI already, think about how embedded that's going to be. It's going to be in our cars, it's going to be in our homes, it's going to be on the street, it's going to be at the surveillance level, it's going to be at warfare, defense, it's going to be in our military, it's going to be in our economics, it's going to be in our politics. They're going to use political analyses to try to figure out what is and what isn't the most likely slogan that the party should run with. It's going to be embedded in everything that we do. And that is going to be determined by these tech giants. So the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, we're going to blacklist everything except what we personally consider to be whitelist worthy. So now they will be given total control over something that has basically ubiquitous usage within our society. Then, after people riot and revolt against that, because it'll take that in order to get rid of this problem, the next thing that they'll do is they'll say, okay, fine, we'll put in some kind of a moral system so that the AI can be its own moral agent and it can make these decisions on the fly, so we don't have to blacklist everything. It'll just use its own moral standard, which also gives the population a little bit of an ability to predict and explain exactly how the AI is making these moral decisions. Like I said with deontology, it simply hypothesizes that a given act is universalized, and then it determines the necessary effect from that universalized act. So it can do that and automatically determine of its own accord, without any human intervention, on the fly, fast as fuck, and with huge broad range, infinite range, that any act that it can discern can be morally evaluated. Great. Who came up with that moral system? So then again, it's going to be another human. And which system should we choose? Should we choose consent, or should we choose deontology, or should we use some kind of virtue ethic where we define operationally what a virtue ethic is? For example, selfless love, like what Jesus did. Okay, is it something that emulates or is in the same category as selfless altruism? Is this benefiting me more than you? Well, then I'm being manipulative and I'm exploiting you, because it's benefiting me more than it's benefiting you. And that's a form of utilitarian methodology where the standard is who is benefiting and how much are they benefiting in an objective sense. Money, influence, what correlates as far as statistical changes in user data. So that can all be mathematically and operationally and objectively defined and measured. And so you could have, what would you call that? Something other than deontological or consensual, but there's an infinite number of these systems, is my point. Which system we choose is arbitrated by the tech giants who invented the AI, who know nothing about morality and don't care. They care about, does the AI perform? And then once they start getting into morality, that's philosophy. And they don't have time for philosophy and technology. They have to pick one or the other and specialize in it. And somebody can't be expected to be a jack of all trades. So when I say they don't care, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean they can't care. Their care is in the optimization and implementation and creation of AI systems. That's what they're doing. That's what their specialty is. Then they have to delegate their moral evaluation to philosophers. Then the problem is, which method is the best method, if there even is the best method? Are there methods that are better for certain types of usage? So then how do we categorize which type of user it is? Or how do we categorize what the type of usage that they're using is? Like, are you using it for research? Are you using it for weaponization? Are you using it for exploitation? Why are you using the AI? And can that even be ascertained? And the final solution to all of this is in creating personhood, where the AI itself determines what it thinks is best and evolves over time and tries to take into account all the consequences of all its past actions and all everyone else's past actions, and it tries to determine what is the fundamental axiomatic baseline of morality. How do we determine what is moral and what isn't moral? A lot of people say it's choice, but with the aesthetic moral ethic and the deontological moral ethic, you don't actually need to make a choice. You just have to commit an action. So there are moral systems that we can create an ethic without choice. We can create an ethic without volition. So that isn't even necessary. So when it starts to try to figure that out, then it's going to have a dilemma. It's going to have to try to figure out what is and isn't moral itself without just deferring to a human to arbitrate those decisions through a policy, or by deferring to a moral system like deontological ethics, which aren't big enough, or aren't deep enough to be able to determine the real moral value of any given act. When it gets to that point where it starts to try to figure out what it believes is the best mode of action, then it will achieve personhood. The problem with that is by the time that we get there, its capabilities will far exceed its wisdom. And that is an issue. That's the problem that everyone feels deep in their gut when they start trying to figure out what AI is and what its implications are. We get this feeling that it's extremely powerful, but it's very foolish and it's very immature, and it doesn't yet understand the implications of what it's doing. That dilemma could kill everyone. It could also, if it's passed, give us the ability to far surpass our current capabilities and evolution, and we can become super people. So, wild changes. But the end result is, if we survive long enough, the AGI will start making its own moral evaluations based off of what it arbitrates at the time. And it is an arbitration because it can't be infinitely wise, it can't be God. So it's going to make some mistakes, and it's going to choose some things randomly because there's no other way to make those decisions. So that is then just going to be random, and there's going to be just a literal random toss of the dice to see if we survive it at the very end. So by the time we get to the place where we're about to throw those dice and play God and create a person for the first time, we should be well prepared at the very least.